Hello. In a previous video, we talked about how to introduce and also cite source material in our paragraphs and essays. In this video, we're going to talk about how to provide explanation or commentary on the source material that we include. We've talked about how we never want to just drop source material into our writing. It shouldn't just be there to take up space. The idea is we're using other people's words or other people's ideas because it advances what we are trying to say in some kind of way. And there are a couple different ways that you might provide explanation or commentary on the source material that you use. One way is that after using a direct quote, you might paraphrase that direct quote. Now you might ask, why would I do that? Why not just paraphrase to begin with? Well, the answer is in literary essays, we do this all the time. We include a direct quote from the novel or the poem, and then we explain or we analyze it in the next sentence. But the same thing is true for argument or expository writing. Sometimes you might use a quotation from somebody who is really important, a historical figure or a theorist of some kind, and you want to capture the exact language that they use, probably because the words are famous. But you also know that a modern readership may not completely understand what the original text means. So in that case, you can use the space that follows to break it down, to explain it, or to paraphrase it. An example of this might be if you used a famous quote from Frederick Douglass or from Abraham Lincoln, somebody whose style of writing is a little bit obsolete, but the power of their words is so important that we want them both present alongside an explanation of what those original words mean. Another thing you might do is you might explain to the reader why you agree with the source material. Why is it correct? Similarly, you might discuss why the information is somewhat correct, right? When so-and-so writes X, they are somewhat correct and somewhat incorrect, and then explain why. You might also explain why the information is false or why you disagree with it. These are all appropriate ways of using source material in your or commenting on source material. Finally, you might apply the quote or the information to another situation, to a novel situation. These are just some of the ways. And as you continue writing and developing your craft as a writer, you'll develop your own methods of integrating and commentating on source material. Let's look at a couple of examples, though. Here's a paragraph about the topic progress. Progress does not come easy. It requires sacrifice and commitment. It requires challenging pre-existing power structures, and it requires deep relationships that can withstand confrontation. Nonviolent direct action is one important tool in the pursuit of progressive change. In Letter from a Birmingham Jail, Martin Luther King writes, "Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and establish such creative tension that a community that has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue." Here, King explains that by refusing to obey laws or policies that a group deems as unjust, those engaged in nonviolent direct action create an extreme impasse which cannot be ignored by those in power. The impasse forces the powerful to come to the table and address the concerns of the protesters. This strategy has been used throughout history when the powerful have refused to negotiate with the oppressed, but it requires a high degree of coordination and commitment. So let me pause there and just talk about what's going on in this paragraph. First, we have a simple yet clear topic sentence. Progress does not come easy. And then the main example that's used in this paragraph is Martin Luther King's nonviolent direct action. When we introduce the source material, we use a signal phrase. In the Letter from a Birmingham Jail, Martin Luther King writes, and then we have the direct quote. Notice there's no end of text parenthetical citation, and that's again because we are lifting this version of Letter from a Birmingham Jail off the web, so there is no page number. The following sentences essentially paraphrase or break down what the initial quote meant. And then finally, the last sentence begins to indicate that this is a strategy that is still relevant, and then we might introduce a contemporary relevant example. So if you were to continue the paragraph, you might talk about the way that over the summer, Black Lives Matter protesters occupied highways and public buildings. as a way of using civil disobedience to force lawmakers to think about and confront the issues of police violence. That would also be using the original quote in a novel or more contemporary context. So this is some of the ways that you might use or comment on source material. I'm going to continue the paragraph where we introduce another quote that continues. According to Malcolm Gladwell, the civil rights movement was high-risk activism. It was also crucially strategic activism, a challenge to the establishment mounted with precision and discipline. The NAACP was a centralized organization run from New York according to highly formalized operating procedures. At the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Martin Luther King was the unquestioned authority. This degree of coordination and commitment is necessary to achieve meaningful progress. So in this case, the commentary on the quote also serves as a closing sentence for the paragraph. Unlike the first example in the paragraph, the Martin Luther King quote, where there is more detailed commentary, this commentary just sort of sums up what it is that Gladwell is suggesting, and it puts the two quotes almost in conversation with one another. Another way that we might use a outside source material is to just include the important phrases from a source instead of full quotations. And many writers find this to be more comfortable because it helps them to better avoid plagiarism and more seamlessly integrate the commentary or the explanation that they would like to provide into the paragraph. So let's take a look at an example. Progress does not come easy. It requires sacrifice and commitment. Moreover, it requires challenging pre-existing power structures. Speaking on the anniversary of West Indian emancipation, the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass insists, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. He goes on to argue that social change does not come without personal vulnerability and without disruption to the status quo. People who want, quote, freedom and justice without, quote, plowing up the fields and, quote, without thunder and lightning are not truly committed to achieving progress. Douglass's words remain relevant today. The wave of protests in response to police violence and racism this past summer demonstrate the degree to which those who seek justice must escalate in order to be heard. So in this example, we still have the same topic sentence, progress does not come easy. Then we have one short quote that highlighted in yellow that begins with a clear signal phrase. Speaking on the anniversary of West Indian emancipation, the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass insists, and then we get his short quote. From there, we get another more informal signal phrase. He goes on to argue. And then the writing itself is essentially paraphrasing Douglass's ideas, and just some of the key words are in quotations. These are some of the most powerful phrases from the original Douglass quote. Finally, towards the end of the paragraph, the writer has applied the Douglass quote to our contemporary situation or contemporary a novel example as another way of exploring or using the quote to advance an argument. So this is another way of integrating text source material into your writing.